Welcome to the history of England from 410 AD to just before the Norman invasion of 1066. Episode 5, Northumbria to the Fore. The Anglo-Saxons were big on genealogy. They especially required the correct lineage in their kings. If you couldn't trace your heritage back to the heathen gods, you didn't have the right to rule. In Northumbria, Aethelfrith, son of Aethelric, grandson of Eyre, king of Bernicia, and married to Eyre, a daughter of Eyre, was holding the new Northumbria together, and having had success at Chester, he went in pursuit of Eadwine, king of Eyre, who was his brother-in-law. Eadwine promptly fled to East Anglia and sought refuge with Raedwold, king of East Anglia. Raedwold is thought the most likely bod buried at the Sutton Ho barrow. This has yielded Anglo-Saxon wonders to behold. In 606, Raedwold was ordered by Aethelfrith to kill Eadwine, but Raedwold's wife persuaded Raedwold that a guest should be shown hospitality. In 617, Aethelfrith brought matters to a head by invading East Anglia, but he didn't get his logistics right and failed to bring all his fighting force together at the right time. Aethelfrith was defeated at a crossing near the River Idle on the road between Doncaster and Lincoln. The pendulum of power swung towards exiled Eadwine, son of Eyre, who, in the debris of the battle, secured Northumbria. It's clear, whilst in Raedwold's kingdom, that Eadwine had been making a power base of friends south of the Humber, because in a few years, with the death of Raedwold, exact date unknown, Eadwine, having the correct genealogy, is made king of East Anglia. Eadwine was ambitious and stretched his overlordship to encompass his neighbouring kingdoms in a loose confederation, but it's unclear how much influence Eadwine had over his neighbouring kings. It is worth pointing out that Bede has King Ethelbert of Kent and Northumbrian King Aethelfrith both as overlords over each other. One thing is certain, it showed that the idea of unity was already taking hold, and probably made easier by the fact that the original invaders seemed to have gathered together anyone who wanted to go on a raiding party, and the expeditions were open to all comers, not strictly a tribe or family or ethnic origin. This would have far-reaching effects, in much the same way as Rome originally had the asylum, where anyone was welcome to stay as long as they became Roman. The Anglo-Saxons didn't have a similar location like the asylum, but they did have a similar attitude. If you fight alongside us and become Anglo-Saxon, you are one of us. And this may be an added reason why the English language took hold so quickly. You might not be from my tribe or family, but as long as I can understand what you say and you act in our ways, I will tolerate you. Sexual attraction does the rest, and intermarriage soon breaks down barriers of all types. The religious intolerance of interbreeding along with disparate tribes raises a mongrel breed, which leads to strong personalities and strong peoples. In his Ecclesiastical History of England, the Venerable Bede goes into some detail about the Roman Church and its stance on marrying close relatives. In Book 1 of the Ecclesiastical History, chapter 27, Bede tells how Augustine sent a series of questions to the Pope, asking to clarify certain religious points. The fourth question was, can two brothers marry two sisters? Simple answer, yes. They are not related until married. Fifth question, to what degree can someone marry their relation? And here the answer is equally clear, that although Latin law does not prevent first cousins marrying, or even closer relatives, experience has shown this to be a bad thing, so should not be allowed. And relations should be at least 3, but preferably 4 times or more removed. So even in the 7th century, they had the knowledge and insight to understand what close family marriage does to the gene pool. not least the woman having a higher chance of dying in childbirth, and children being born with physical defects and being bonkers with mental health problems. The answers to Augustine's questions also explain why in-laws and step-parents should not remarry relatives. This is on the basis that a marriage is for life. When two people marry, any children become part of that marriage. So if one dies, marrying their offspring from another relationship is classed in the same way as incest. This will pop up more than once later in our story. Aethelfrith had exiled Eadwine, but on his return in 617 Eadwine asserted the kingship of Northumbria by virtue of already being the rightful king of the Eyre. He then extended his overlordship across the rest of the country by a confederation of kings from the majority of the rest of England, although it is unclear whether this confederation felt any real fealty towards Eadwine. The greatness of Northumbria was now at its peak. Under Eadwine's leadership, civil government flourished. A proverb arose, which was repeated for later kings. A woman with her babe might walk scatheless from sea to sea in Eadwine's day. Springs of fresh water were marked at the roadside by a wooden marker, and a brass cup beside each for the traveller's refreshment. Whilst not a return to the glorious days of Rome, it did at least show that the times were more settled. Slowly, civilization was returning, but it would be dreadfully slow. The idea a tortoise with 3 legs could have made better progress would not be unfounded. His kingdom was, for a time, at peace, and it was claimed that Kent bound itself to him by offering the king's daughter Ethelberg as a wife, which Eadwine accepted. And with her along came her Christian priest Paulinus. He was tall but slightly stooping, with an aquiline nose and deep black hair over a thin, worn face. The wise men of Northumbria came to deliberate over this new faith he preached. Eadwine would soon be converted, as were others who found the charm of Christianity in the light it threw over a darkness that encompassed their lives. A major influence was the simple idea put forward by Paulinus that life could be compared to that of a sparrow that comes into the hall during a stormy night and tarries in the warmth. Before it enters the lighted room from the dark, nothing is known about it. Then it is lit for all to see and alive for all to see, before vanishing into the blackness of the wintry night. So we tarry in the light of life before vanishing in the darkness of death. Thus Christian teaching gives us new light after death, so let us follow it. The promise of everlasting life after death and a restful life would be enticing, especially when compared to the brutal living and uncertain future of the Norse pagan afterlife. Shakespeare echoes this same philosophy of the bird in the light in the tempest. As I foretold you, we are all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. 1,000 years before Shakespeare wrote those lines, Eadwine held court at his royal city by the river Derwent, and it was not without incident. In 626, Eomer, or Eomer, if you are a fan of Lord of the Rings, an envoy from Cuichelm, the King of Wessex, brought a message, and in the midst of the conference rose to his feet and, drawing a short double-edged sword, rushed at Eadwine. Leila, one of Eadwine's thanes, managed to come between the assassin and his target, but so furious was the stroke that the sword cut through Leila and still reached its aim. In the tussle that followed, Fore, another guard, was killed before Eomer was overpowered. That same night a daughter was born to Eadwine, who promptly promised his bishop Paulinus that he would give his daughter Eanflad to God's house if he won a great victory over King Cuichelm. Within the year, Eadwine invaded Wessex and gave battle, in which 5 enemy kings were killed, and this seems to have been enough for Eadwine, and in thanks had a wooden church built for Paulinus in York. This was called St. Peter's and was later rebuilt in stone. Thus, in the 620s, the foundation of York's monumental minster was begun. This particular story is instructive about the lives of the people because it comes from us through Bede, who wrote it in the lingua franca of the time, Latin. However, the original seems to have been told in song or as a poem, so would have been heard in the native Anglo tongue, probably at night, perhaps in winter, around a glimmering fire, as the listeners huddled closer to keep warm and hear the tales of valour in the great hall. It makes Eadwine an heroic figure in his time, but also carried on the tradition of poetry as part history, part legend, part educational narrative, melded together whilst the people themselves were slowly melding together. Tribes at this time may well have been mainly held together by family links, but it's clear that with all the disruption of the last 150 years that the links were made looser, probably by the perceived threat of attack from outside the kingdom with which they held allegiance. Cuichelm was still King of Wessex, and the ASC tells us he fought a battle with the Mercian king Penda in 628, which is taken to be a draw, as the two came to an agreement afterwards. With the spread of Christianity through Kent, then diverging to Wessex and Essex and East Anglia onwards to Northumbria before spiralling back to Mercia, the church was in the ascendant. But the faith of the heathen gods was not to fall without a struggle. In Kent there was a reaction against the cross after the death of Aethelfrith, with many recanting Christ in favour of the heathen gods. His son, Raedwold, who came to the throne, married his stepmother, which, as pointed out, was in the eyes of the Church of Christ a crime along with apostasy. Bede takes comfort in the fact that Raedwold had gone mad, although no mention is made of this madness disappearing when Raedwold returned to the faith and divorced his wife. It also doesn't mention if the novelty of the older woman had waned and he traded her in for a younger model. Raedwold, when he was king of East Anglia, hedged his bets. Although he had resolved to serve Christ, he still kept faith with the gods of Woden and Thor together, so he set up a Christian altar facing a pagan shrine in his royal temple. History does not record if he worshipped alternate days facing the opposite way. One incident was when the young or junior kings of the East Saxons burst into the church where Mellitus, the Bishop of London, was administering the Eucharist to his congregation. They cried, "Give us the white bread that you gave our father King Saba." When the bishop refused, unless they converted, he was driven from their realm. King Sabert, or Saba, of Essex, had been baptised, but does not seem to have required any of his court to convert, and his sons were obviously not baptised. So at this time, the province of Essex can still be regarded as heathen. The tide of reaction seemed checked with Eadwine's conversion to the faith until Mercia found renewed strength and sudden greatness as the champion of the heathen gods. While Northumbria was in the grip of Aethelfrith and Eadwine, Mercia had submitted to the overlordship of Christ. But when King Penda took the reins, Mercia saw in the rally of the old religion a chance of becoming independent from the Northumbrian giant. With only the people of Mercia, he had not the might to take on Eadwine, but there had been a lull in the fighting with the Britons, and so Penda allied himself with Cadwallon, a Welsh king, and together the ASC records they took battle with Eadwine at Hatfield in 633, where the Northumbrian Eadwine was defeated and slain. The Hatfield in question is likely to be Hatfield Chase in Yorkshire, not Hatfield in Hertfordshire in the south, because moving with swiftness, Penda and Cadwallon did for the Northumbrians. Having united his own Mercians with those of Upper Trent, the Lindiswarths of present-day Lincolnshire and Southumbrians around Leicester, Penda took control of the Severn Valley from the West Saxons, making what became known as Mercia. Northumbria was, however, just a sleeping giant, and when the squabbling between Bernicia and Eyre ended, it had a new king, Oswald. The Welsh under Cadwallon had remained in control of the heart of the north. Oswald gathered himself a small force near Hadrian's Wall and set up a stone cross. Then throwing himself to his knees cried to his army to pray to the living God. Invigorated by his ministrations, Oswald's army defeated Cadwallon, who fell in battle, and in after years the site was known as Heaven's Field. Oswald brought the power of Northumbria back to the forefront. It was the Christianity of Columba, not the Church of Paulinus, which nerved Oswald to his struggle for the cross. Paulinus, at the first sign of trouble, fled from Northumbria at Eadwine's fall. He was away like a scalded cat, and the Roman Church, though fairly established in Kent, was seen as weak against the heathen reaction. Its place in the conversion of northern England was taken up by the missionaries from Ireland. To grasp the underlying meaning of this change, it should be noted how greatly the Christian church in this part of Europe had been affected by the German invasion. Before the landing of the Anglo-Saxons in Britain, the Christian church spanned across Western Europe to the Atlantic coast of Ireland. The pagan conquest of Britannia cleft a splinter of heathendom into the very heart of this communion, severing it in twain. Italy, Spain and Gaul spread around the Mediterranean Sea, whose churches and clergy owed obedience to and remained in direct contact with the See of Rome. The Anglo-Saxon invasions had the effect of dividing Christianity and putting a cleft twixt the Church of Ireland and Roman Catholicism. Thus, the condition of the two portions of Western Christendom was very different. While the Christianity in the Mediterranean struggled for life through laxity, Ireland remained unscourged by invaders and was invigorated and became full of vitality. The Christianity of the Irish was embraced with energy and expansive enthusiasm. Letters, learning and art sprang up rapidly, encouraging science and biblical knowledge. For a short time this had fled from the continent, but sheltered in the sanctuary of its new schools and scriptorium. Iona geographically looks to be an outpost, but mentally was at the core of the Irish faith. And before anyone complains, for Irish at this time, read the Scotty. The Christian zeal was invigorated in Ireland, and St Patrick, the Welsh-born first missionary of the Verdant Isle, had not been half a century dead when Irish Christianity went into battle with heathenism, which was rolling in upon the Christian world. Irish missionaries soon laboured among the Picts of the Highlands and amidst the Frisians of the northern seas. The Irish missionary Columba founded monasteries in Burgundy and the Apennines, the backbone of Italy. The canton of St Gall still commemorates the name of another Irish missionary before whom the spirits of opposition fled Lake Constance. A snapshot taken at this time could give the impression that the world's history would change, that Celtic Ireland, not Latin Rome, would shape the destinies of the European Church. If you found this gradely, please click the like button and also recommend us to others on Twitter, Parler, Instagram and the like. Also, click the subscribe button and ring that bell to get a weekly reminder of new videos. Remember, if you have questions or useful suggestions, leave a message in the comments column. Thank you.